What is going on, fellow trumpeters and musicians? My name is Joshua Rzepka, and today is Mute Monday. If you're new around here, Mute Monday is a weekly series where I discuss and demonstrate different trumpet mutes. Now, before we get started, if you would like to take your mute game and your trumpet playing to the next level, I have created a free mute handbook, and you can download it by clicking the link below, entering your email, and I will send it directly to your inbox. In today's Mute Monday, I am very excited to be sharing with you 8 very rare vintage fiber mutes. Some of these mutes are ones that you see pop up on eBay from time to time. Some of them you may never have heard of, and that is why I want to share all of them with you. I get messages pretty frequently about these different mutes asking me about the age, how to identify them, what I think of them, what makes them good or what makes them bad. So in this video, I'm going to give you a lot of information on how to identify some of these mutes and which ones are the better ones and which ones you should be looking out for, which ones you may want to pay a premium for. There's a lot of people who are listing these mutes online. They don't know what year they're from, and sometimes they are listed incorrectly. So I want to get that information out to you to help you out so that when you're building your mute collection, you really are getting exactly the mute that you want. All right, the first mutes that we are going to check out today are the Humsenburg mutes, and everyone has a Humsenburg mute of some sort. However, this right here, this is one of the original straight mutes, and check this out. Look at the top. You see how there is a metal ring at the top? And now look at the very, very bottom. You see there's a little pin here. All right, this is the original stone-lined straight mute. If you find one of these where it has that metal ferrule on the top, and where on the label it says Chicago, Illinois, and then on the very bottom it's got that little pin coming through the bottom. And remember, there's actually a little layer of concrete inside of these mutes. That's the stone lined in the stone line mute. If you find one that has this bit on the top and on the bottom, then you know that it is from the original production line, from the very first run of these mutes that they did, which would be somewhere between 1939, 1940, and the very, very early 40s. So you know it's an old mute, and this is one of the ones that you want. So you're going to hear this, but I'm going to play this vintage Humsenburg next to this vintage Humsenburg. And this is also a Chicago one. This one was masterfully restored by Roger Ingram. His craftsmanship is second to none. And this one right here, you can see it doesn't have the ferrule on top. It does not have that little pin on the bottom, but it still says Chicago, Illinois, which means this was from the 1940s before they moved their factory to East Chicago, Indiana. So the label on a mute and then some of the little details can really give you a lot of information about when the mute is from. Next, we will be checking out 2 vintage Ray Robinson mutes. Check these out. These are so popular. People love these mutes. And I've got 2 of them right here. And one of these is from the early 1930s, and the other one is from, I believe, the 1950s. Now, this one here, this is the older one, and check it out. As I rotate it, you see how it is smooth all the way through. There is no seam and there are no rivets on this mute. While this one, if I rotate it, look at that nice label. If I rotate it, you can see I get to a point where there is a seam and there are rivets on it. And that is how you tell how old these mutes are. So this one right here, this is the older one. This is from the early 1930s. And I believe that this one is probably from the 1950s based on the condition and the way that it's constructed. So I'm going to play both of these and you can hear how it changed throughout the years. And of course, they don't make Ray Robinson mutes anymore. So you have to find one of these on eBay. And odds are it's probably going to be in pretty rough shape. I've got probably 5 or 6 or 7 of these, and these are the 2 best that I have. And this is the best one that I have that doesn't have the rivets. It's really hard to find one that hasn't been totally destroyed. Now, speaking of mutes that are often destroyed, at least in my experience, check this out. This is a mute from Joseph Rapuano, and you see these pop up from time to time on eBay. You see them online, and they all kind of have this stamp on it, right? Look at that. Joseph Rapuano, New York City. And these mutes, well, Joseph Rapuano was a trumpeter in New York City. He previously lived in Chicago. He applied for a patent for these mutes in 1918. and he died in 1935. So these mutes are at least from that I would say 16, 17, 18 through the 1930s. So gives you an indication on how old these are. Now, when I say these are frequently destroyed, well, check out the tops of these. You see, one of them is a little bit shorter than the other. And normally when I find a mute where one is taller than the other, I think, well, maybe one of these was for cornet and one of them was for the trumpet. However, when I check out all of the different ones that I have, when I really look into these, I've got 3 or 4 of these. What I see happening is that the tops of these mutes, actually people have taken scissors or something and cut them. And I think they did that in order to try and get it to play better in tune or to respond better. Like I said, I've got a couple of these, and this one plays the best of all of them. So this is going to be the one that I demonstrate. If you are searching for one of these mutes, odds are that it's going to be pretty messed up. The top of these mutes, a lot of them seems to be people are cutting them. And it kind of makes me think that maybe when these were being sold, that was part of the instructions, that you needed to cut the mute in some way in order to get it to fit your bell, as opposed to filing the corks down more. I'm not really sure. I haven't seen any documentation of that, but that is really the only explanation that I can come up with as to why every single one of these mutes that I've got is a different height, unless they just didn't have that great quality control when they manufactured them. The next mute we're going to check out is a very rare mute, and this is actually the only one of them that I've ever seen before, and this is a Vega mute. Check that out. Check out the bottom, and you can see there's a label on it, and then you can see here there's actually a address stamped into it. And using the label and the address, that's where I got all the information about this mute. Now, the Vega company, 1880s, they started making instruments, and primarily they were making banjos and string instruments. However, by the early 1900s, around in 1909, they started making brass instruments. Then they started making accessories as well. And fun fact, Miles Davis actually played a Vega trumpet before he played a Martin Committee. Now, this mute was a bit of a challenge to try and date, to try and find out when it was made. I brought it to Roger Ingram. He checked it out. He stuck a light inside and looked inside, and he gave me his opinions. Then I went online and I did a bunch of research, and I found some old advertisements for these mutes, and I actually compared the logo here. You see how it says Vega, and there's a star, and the word Vega is inside of the star, and then there's a couple little things coming off the side. And using that specific logo and the address on the bottom of this mute, it couldn't have been made before 1916 or 17, because that, I believe, is when they moved to the location on Columbus Avenue in Boston. And then 1927, I started seeing advertisements after that where they changed the logo. So just makes me think that this mute was made somewhere between 1917 and 1927. So this is a very, very old mute, and it's actually in really good condition. So I'm excited to play this for you. Now, rounding out all of these vintage mutes, I have 2 Shastock straight mutes that I'm going to play for you, but I'm going to show you 4 of them right now. Now, the 2 that I'm going to play for you today are these 2. Check it out. You're going to see this one has 3 corks on the top, standard cork configuration, and on the bottom, here you can see there is a stamp on the wooden resonator on the bottom. Now this one, check it out. You can see there is a label on it. There is no stamp on the bottom, and you can see the material on this is actually kind of a cool texture. It's like a leather texture almost, and that's just one of the materials that they offered. And the cork configuration on the top is different. This has got that 6 cork configuration instead of the 3 cork configuration. Now, the material on this, they just offered it in a couple of different materials. They had the flat fiber. They had one that kind of was like a little leather look that kind of looked cooler. And then they also had one that they made in white, just so all the bands could have something that either matched or set themselves apart, something that they felt looked a little better on the bandstand. That's why Shastock was offering these mutes in different finishes. Now, if you are looking to get one of these mutes, one thing to keep in mind, Shastock made straight mutes for the trumpet and the cornet, and most people don't know the difference. Here is a cornet straight mute. Check this out. It looks very, very similar to the trumpet straight mute. You can see the label there, made in Cleveland, Ohio. and the wooden resonator on the bottom. However, the big difference in these is the height. One of these is at least half an inch taller than the other. So these are different dimensions. This smaller one is for the cornet, this bigger one is for the trumpet. So as you're looking online, you may come across ones that are labeled incorrectly. You may not know unless you buy two of them and you see that one of them is the bigger one and one of them is the smaller one. Today I'm going to be demonstrating this one right here, which is actually an older one. This one right here with the stamp on the bottom, I believe this is an early 1920s one, a little bit later. They changed the configuration of the corks on the top to these 6 corks, and that's what they ended up using for decades. In 1940, Micro Products bought Shastock. So that's when you start seeing the label where it says Shastock, a Micro Products company. So both of these are the early Shastock mutes from the early 1920s, and then this one here, I believe, from the later 1920s. So very cool, and very excited to be playing both of these for you as well. All right, that is enough talking and enough introduction. Here are all of the mutes. All right, so you just heard all 8 of these vintage fiber mutes, and what did you think? So cool that some of these mutes are 100 years old or maybe even older than 100 years old. So very cool that they are still in good playable condition, and some of these actually really sound and play great. So starting at the beginning, the Humsenburg mutes. Of course, Humsenburg is still one of the most popular companies out there. I will say of these 2 mutes, this one that Roger Ingram restored really plays so great. This one's all right. This one just plays better. The sound on both of these is very similar. The intonation on this one and the low notes, just not as good as on this one. And I feel like the articulation on this one was a little bit more even. Maybe that's because it was restored, or maybe that's the reason that they changed the design and that they took this ferrule off the top and this little pin out of the bottom. Although my understanding is that they changed the design because they started getting really popular and they started selling a lot. And well, it's cheaper to make it the way that they made it later because this was more labor intensive. Of course, if you find one of these are very, very rare. These are very difficult to find. So if you find one in good condition, these are worth quite a bit. Next up was the Ray Robinson mutes, and I love these mutes. This one right here, of course, being that earlier one without the rivets. And this mute right here, I love the sound on this mute. I love taking it to early big band gigs and playing it because I just think it's got that sound that it is perfect for the era. Now this one right here is the newer one, and I've got to say, for me, the older one, it sounds better and it plays better. The newer one was harder to play in the lower register. The old one is not great in the lower register, but this one is actually a little bit worse. And the intonation on both of these actually, it wasn't as good as the Humsenburg. It's a little bit more of a challenge. That being said, this one right here, I just love the sound and the feel of it is great. This one, it projected more and it was a little bit more open, but it didn't have that same sound as this vintage one. So if you can find one of these old ones without the rivets, that's the one that you want. You really want that old Ray Robinson mute. Next up was the Rapuano mute. This mute right here, you see him pop up from time to time on eBay, and like I said, this is very old, somewhere between 1917 and 1935. These are really hit or miss just because the tops of them are generally cut and they're pretty mangled. This mute plays all right. It is not my favorite straight mute, so it's great to have in a collection, but I wouldn't necessarily bring this out to a gig, especially if I've got one of these vintage Humsenburg or one of these vintage Ray Robinson mutes. But it is a nice, fun mute to have, and some of these mutes, they were created specifically for big band or for, you know, different circumstances. Well, Joseph Rapuano was a classical player, so I feel like that is what this mute was designed for and geared towards. So, you know, maybe it plays a little bit different. It's a little different sound, but at the end of the day, this is not the one I'm throwing into my case if I am bringing a vintage mute to a gig. Now, speaking of mutes that I wouldn't bring to the gig, this Vega Mute right here, as cool as this is and as interesting as it was to research this mute, the dimensions of this mute, it's different from any of the other mutes. It's a lot narrower. It's pretty tall. It's just like the Shastock mute. The bottom is so small in diameter. I think that the design of this mute just wasn't as good as it could have been. It is made very well. The construction of this is great. However, the design, I think it just isn't quite there. And because of that, this mute is not even throughout the registers. The intonation is off, and you know, the articulation it just isn't quite there. But I'm very glad that I have this and that I found it, because now I know what it sounds like and I'm able to share it with all of you. Now, finishing up the lineup, the Shastock mutes. These are some of the most popular and sought after vintage mutes that are out there, and it's for good reason. These mutes play and they sound great. Now, personally, I actually liked the sound and the way that this later 1920s Shastock played versus the earlier one. These are actually both the same height. However, if you compare the very bottoms of them, this one is a little bit rounder on the bottom than this one right here. So they changed the design a little bit, and of course then they changed the mute configuration. And I just think that this one just plays better. It is better in tune, it's better articulation, and I really dig it. Now, I didn't compare in this video all of the different eras of Shastock, and maybe in a future video I'm going to compare Shastock from the early 1920s through when they were bought in 1940 by Microproducts, and as they continued onwards, maybe I'll compare all of those mutes, because that would be pretty cool, because people are selling these online and they're listing them incorrectly very often. Sometimes people will say that these are from the 1930s and it says Microproducts on it, so obviously that is not the case. But if you can find one that has got this old label that says Cleveland, Ohio on it, that is the one that you want. And that is the classic sound for these Shastock mutes. So you can't go wrong if you get one with that label in good condition. I think you're really gonna like it. Of all the mutes that I played today, these rank near the top. I would say the early Humsenburg straight mute that Roger restored for me, as well as this one, are the best of the entire lot. And then the original Ray Robinson mute, to me, I actually like the sound and the play of that a little bit more than both of these. But overall, this and then that restored Chicago era Humsenburg, these both play the best, and these are going to be the easiest to play on a gig, and you're going to get a great sound out of them. So I hope that this video was informative and helped you out in your vintage mute journey. If you have some of these lying around the house, hopefully you know a little bit more about them now. If you've been eyeing some mutes on eBay or Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace or wherever, hopefully this gives you some more knowledge and confidence going in there, so you know that you're buying exactly what you want. Now, of all these mutes, which one did you think was the best? Really interested to know what you thought. A lot of them sounded very similar, but there were definitely differences in the way that they projected, in the brightness, and the articulation, and how even they were from top to bottom. So let me know in the comments. Very interested. If you have any of these mutes at home, which one do you enjoy using the most and taking out to gigs? If you enjoyed today's video, why don't you go click that like button? And while you're at it, please hit the subscribe button. It really makes a very big difference. I want to thank you for checking out my video today, and I will see you in the next video.